Sure. Good afternoon. I'm Sean O'Brien. I'm the town moderator. I'm here with Town Administrator Keith Hickey, and we're here to discuss the annual town meeting, which will take place on May 22nd at 9 a.m. at the Kingston Collection. How are you, Mr. Hickey?
I'm doing well, sir. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me. And just before, I'd like to run through the articles with you today. But before we do that, I just want to remind everybody that town meeting, we're still going to be wearing face masks. There's going to be a new setup at the Kingston Collection to hopefully improve the sound. There'll be a sound check this week, and I will be doing a walkthrough and maybe a video to explain the process of addressing town meeting for the residents to ensure that, you know, safety standards, sanitized stations and clean microphones and all that will be available for a safe town meeting. The town meeting will still run by town meeting time. Anyone wanting to address town meeting will approach a microphone. It'll be the standard 2 minutes, and then if there's follow-up, you can have another minute to readdress any unanswered questions or anything else along those lines. In this town meeting, we have approximately 33 articles, and hopefully we could run through those. But the one thing I'd like to begin with and give plenty of notice to is last year I had done a consent agenda. And what that was is I took a number of articles that routinely passed through town meeting, and I grouped them together. And I felt it moved the stuff that routinely passes town meeting and gave us a lot more time to discuss the articles that need debate and are more, from my perception, in the Board of Selectmen's or the Finance Committees, those articles that are more controversial and deserve more time. That consent agenda, I'm going to discuss with Town Council on the ones I want to do to make sure they agree with the format on how I'm going to do it. The articles that I'm considering for the consent agenda are articles number 3, 6, 7, 8, 14, 15, 16, 18, 19, 29, 30, 31, 32, and that's it. And with that, for example, if I moved articles 14, 15, and 16, which are the union contracts, as one article, one motion, a consent agenda, anyone in the room who wanted to address it, I would just read out the articles, and they could just put a hold on it. Sure. And that would remove it from the consent agenda, and it would be like it was never there. I think it's important, just everyone realizes that this is going to happen, because if you were going to come late for articles, 29 or 32, at least you have noticed that it could be taken up first thing at 9 a.m. or sure. 9:15. So hopefully that will give us some more time to get to budget articles and what worth. So with further ado, let's start going through the articles.
Sure.
Article 1, the 2020 annual reports.
So we don't have any, there are no reports. So usually we'll have boards or commissions who may have a report to share with the town meeting audience. There is not one this year, so we can move that along pretty quickly.
Okay. And then we have article number 2, which is the prior year's bills, and it looks like you paid most of the bills. I see that there's 2 bills outstanding from 2 departments, one the town clerk for $2,145, and another one from the water department for $389.
Yeah, it's required to have a separate article for the prior year bills. It does take 80% passage, so that's something, it's a housekeeping type thing, but we need town meeting approval to allow us to pay the bills for services already provided.
Okay, and that was approved 5-0 by the Board of Selectmen and 4-0 unanimously by the Finance Committee. Article 3, which is one I'm considering for a consent agenda, is the authorize of the revolving fund, and that one is for programs such as the Adams Center inspectional services. Can you give a little background on that?
Sure. These revolving funds are funds that obviously don't expire each year. The amounts that are being requested to be spent no more than for each fiscal year has not changed. The Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen have approved all of these revolving funds. It's again, more of a housekeeping issue for special accounts that funds are collected for that can be expended for specific purposes identified and previously approved at a town meeting.
And there's the big one, is Article number 4 is the 2022 operating budget. What goes into putting the budget together?
Typically, you know, the first and foremost, the Board of Selectmen and/or the Budget Committee will provide some direction to the town administrator on what their expectations are for the budget, some of the items that they may want to consider, including that may be new. The Capital Planning Committee is typically weighed in on what they're proposing for capital improvements, things of that nature, and then the taking those goals forward, the town administrator works with the department heads to bring a budget forward that meets the expectations that were set forth by the board, the FinCom and other people, and presents a budget, a balanced budget to the Board of Selectmen for their consideration, review, and ultimate voting on. Moves to the Finance Committee. They do a separate review, independent review, and then they make their recommendations, which are what's in front of you this evening on the ballot, excuse me, on the warrant. Fiscal 22 was a little bit different with all the transition and the COVIDs and things of that nature. But ultimately, the Board of Selectmen has approved the budget. The Finance Committee has reviewed and approved the budget. And what you have in front of you this evening or today for consideration is going to be what the Finance Committee has recommended for an operating budget for the general fund for fiscal 2022.
And is that, where is that compared to last year's budget numbers?
It looks a little bit different than last year. Last year had a $1.8 million for the non-town net metering that is no longer being budgeted for, so the actual overall budget has dropped significantly, almost $2 million. The majority of that, frankly, is something we're just not budgeting for anymore. The overall budget is about a 2% increase in appropriations, apples to apples. There have been some restorations of staffing levels and appropriation amounts that were cut as part of the precautions from the COVID pandemic from the fiscal 2020 budget. But overall, it's a very similar budget to what's been approved in past years by the voters.
And just to touch briefly, I see the Silver Lake Regional School district assessment of $11 million and then some. Now, that has to pass by at least 2 of the towns, correct?
That's correct.
So
Yep.
if Plimpton and Halifax pass it, then we're bound by it, or?
We are. If Kingston was to amend the amount being appropriated for Silver Lake and either increased it or reduced it, and the other 2 communities approved it as is, the town of Kingston would be bound by the votes of those 2 other communities. So yeah, that's how that works.
Okay. And just at town meeting, I think by practice, I will do this kind of, I'll call out each one if there's a hold. Mm-hmm. So I would call out, you know, general government, public safety, and if anyone wants to address or has questions towards those, we'll hold it, and then we could circle back, and we could have a vote on
Sure.
all of the budget, and then if there's one that needs to be debated, we could do that after.
Sure.
I did that last year, and it seemed to work out pretty well. But there was, the Board of Selectmen did meet, and there could be a couple of motions to the town budget. Can you
Sure.
explain that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the board had asked me to consider whether or not, in my opinion, once I was here for a period of time, to determine whether or not there was a need for, I could support the development and creation of a assistant town administrator position. And after my time here and seeing the workload that goes on in the department, and frankly, the amount of work outside of the job descriptions that both staff people, both the other two full-time staff people do in there, they're really working outside of their job descriptions anyway. One is acting as if she's an assistant town administrator. The other is acting as if she's the executive assistant to the town administrator and board of selectmen. So I've recommended to the board that they include, it's about $35,000 in funds for the reorganization of the selectmen's office. Ultimately, first, the board supported that. The Finance Committee chose not to support that, and the Board of Selectmen, in an attempt to have some collaboration with the Finance Committee, ultimately voted to support the bottom line of the budget for the Finance Committee approved. I had a board meeting a couple of nights ago with the Board of Selectmen on May 11th, and the board, I asked the board if they had any interest or intention in proposing an amendment that would fund the reorganization of the Selectmen's office. They voted 5-0 to support that. My request was to find out if they were going to move an article like that or an amendment like that. Should I be preparing an amendment so they could present that? That was the reason for my question. They supported 5-0 to present that motion to amend the operating budget. So I'll have that ready for the board for May 22nd, and I expect at this point that the board will make a motion to amend the operating budget by about $35,000 to fund the reorganization of the Selectmen's office.
So this isn't some sort of reward for the hard work they've done when they didn't have a town administrator here in town. It's something you feel after going through and being here that it's a need for the town?
Yeah, and it's really been going on since long before I was here, in talking to a variety of people. You know, the two staff people in the selectman's office have for a number of years, anyways, gone above and beyond what their roles, what they were hired to do, to a much higher level than what their responsibilities are supposed to be. So what I'm trying to do is just have the position title and the compensation, frankly, be compatible with the responsibilities they have taken on over the years and do well with.
In terms of state funding, was that similar to what it was last year?
Yeah, state funding, I mean, it's gone up a little bit, thankfully, but again, the state has been fantastic, frankly, with the COVID situations and some of the lost revenue they've been dealing with. You know, they've dipped into their rainy day fund and have kept communities whole. So some of the concerns that we had a year ago, the state has been able to quell at this point, which is nice.
Okay. Turning to Article number 5 is the Water Department Enterprise Fund Budget and Surplus Revenue and Appropriation. And this is basically the Water Department's operating budget for the fiscal year, correct?
That's correct.
And can you just explain how that works?
Sure. So, you know, the Water Department and shortly we'll be talking about the Wastewater Department. Both of those articles fund the operations of the water and wastewater departments. They're a separate company, so to speak, from the town and the general fund that operates the majority of the functions of the community. The water and sewer departments are paid for by user fees. Basically, the water and sewer fees that they collect, bill out for and collect, are how they fund their operations. These two articles, both the water and wastewater, would fund the articles that are necessary to operate both of those departments for fiscal '22.
Now, just to touch on, there's been a lot of unfortunate issues with the water department, and I'd just like you to address that
Sure.
for us now. I know it's been addressed at Board of Selectmen meetings. People having, dirty water, and like the song, but Kingston's my town.
Yeah.
What's going on with that?
Well, it's been a few things, really, and you know, the water department, a year or so ago, made people aware that they will be taking one of the tanks offline to do some repairs and maintenance to that tank, something that's just necessary to make sure that they prolong the life of that water tank, water storage tank. Because there's a shift in water pressures and things of that nature, that people much smarter than I can probably describe better than I can, it will impact some of the pressures in the water lines across town. The water department has done, I think, a pretty good job at trying to balance those pressures out. What we have had happen this spring is 2 or 3 issues or situations in a short period of time that really exacerbated the problem. The first one was that we had the water tank that was online. There was a miscommunication between the electronics that determine how high the water levels are in the existing tank with the communication system that says, okay, the tank's getting a little bit low, we've got to click on the pumps and draw water from the wells and pump it back into the tank to raise the height of the tank so it stays consistent. That caused a lot of disturbances within the water system and the pressures in the water systems that caused a lot of the brown water to come into people's homes. You know, it's having had the explanation this may happen and having an explanation of why it happened. It's still something that you know, I think we're honestly, you know, embarrassed about as a community. We want to make sure that the water we provide our citizens that they're paying for is of the highest quality. And while there was no risk of drinking the water that was discolored, it certainly had a different taste to it, and it certainly wasn't very appetizing looking. So I'm not sure if anybody wanted to drink it. But you know, one of the things that I hope people will try to keep in mind is the water department a year or so ago brought forward funding requests to construct some additional infrastructure in the water department, infrastructure processing distribution plans that will address this discolored water. And that should be done in about a year. And once that's done and the water tank that's offline now is fixed and back online, the risk of having discolored water is significantly less than what it was prior to the tank going offline and this upgrade happening. So unfortunately, there's a little bit of pain right now, and I know the water commissioners are trying to figure out what the best way is to deal with that. But the water commissioners were aware of this issue quite some time ago and had taken steps to try to address it as best they can. Unfortunately, it just didn't happen quick enough.
In Article 5, I don't know if I missed it on the consent agenda. That is Article 5.1 that would be considered. And that's all, Article 5 is all favorable from the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee. Article 6 is the well site land purchase, and that's to allow the purchase of land for a new well site, correct?
Yeah, so the water department, again, is trying to have some forethought. There's a couple of pieces of property that abut one of their existing well sites that has come up for sale. They're interested in purchasing that. The water that would be drawn from those potential new wells wouldn't be drawn for at least 5 or 6 years, because there's a process that you've got to go through to have a well like this certified by the state for drinking water. But again, the water commissioners are trying to, you know, plan for the future and make sure there's sufficient drinking water in the Kingston water system to satisfy not only our current needs but future needs as well. This funds that potential future need.
And that was favorable by both the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee, correct?
Yes.
And then Article 7, I think you just briefly touched on, that's the Wastewater Department's enterprise fund and budget. And that's similar in terms of separate entity.
Same thing, it's like a separate business, so we raise and appropriate the funds to operate that business separately in a separate warrant article.
And that was favorable through the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen. Turning to Article 8, the Renewable Energy Enterprise Fund budget. This article funds the Renewable Energy Enterprise Fund with appropriations from Eversource reimbursements received for 2022. The Renewable Energy Fund pays the wind and solar developers based on the town's power purchasing agreement with the developers. This article is specific to all power generated from the renewable energy projects located on town's capped landfill that is sold back to Eversource, also known as the grid. Correct?
It is, and you know, again, the turbine isn't operating, the solar array hasn't been built yet. There's talk about potentially getting both of those online in fiscal '22. So this is kind of a placeholder, so to speak, to that if in fact those are generating power and the town is making money, we then have to share some of those revenues with the partners that we've contracted with to construct those energy-producing resources.
And if no power is produced or nothing's received from the town, then the money's not used.
Correct.
Turning to Article number 9, that is the Capital Planning Committee's proposed projects here in the town, correct?
It is, and the number that's being asked this year is a much larger number than what's been asked in the past. Typically, the Capital Planning Committee has been given a ballpark of about $500,000 to fund some of the capital needs of the community. This year, because the community has performed as well as it has financially, there's the treasurer and the finance director have supported significantly increasing the capital purchases in fiscal '22 to try to catch up with some of the capital needs that have been deferred for a while. So this year, you know, they're asking for about almost $1.5 million in capital costs. Just to try to put some of that in perspective, you know, about $450,000 of that are dump trucks for streets, trees, and parks, 4 dump trucks. I'm sorry, 2 dump trucks that we'd be paying cash for to allow some of the older vehicles that are really problematic and not reliable, especially during the winter season, to be replaced. Those have been deferred for a bit. So the Capital Planning Committee is proposing to buy 2 trucks this year. There's also $206,000 for a lease payment of the ladder truck that was approved in last year's town meeting. So there are lease payments of about $250,000 from previous approvals that are funded as part of this $1.5 million. But a good significant amount of that is for streets, trees, and park vehicles. And you know, certainly, I think, are warranted at this point moving forward.
Now, the fire truck, I believe the Amazon product and the development at the mall is actually going to contribute some money towards that truck at some point in time.
And they have. So Amazon actually gave us the $250,000 that they agreed to provide to offset some of the funding of the ladder truck a week ago. So we've received that. Those funds have been used to reduce the amount of money we had to borrow or for leasing the vehicles or leasing the ladder truck. So that's been taken into consideration. I believe the lease is a 5-year lease at about $206,000 a year. So that, like I said, that $250,000 from Amazon has been received and deposited by the town. We have not received a check from the apartments at the mall at this point, but will.
Now, does the capital planning, do they look 2, 3, 4 years in the future when they're putting this together to see what the needs of each department is going forward?
They do. They've got a 5-year plan that they develop and propose to meet the needs not only of the current or upcoming fiscal year, but 3 or 4 years out. So they have a an ability to properly plan, so there aren't any large spikes and impacts that may have to be raised through taxes or ask for a debt exclusion or an override or something along those lines. So they have, they do, and they have worked on a long-term financial plan. Because we had more funding available this year than we have in the past, the thought was to try to not only fund some of these capital projects in a total amount significantly more than the $500,000 that's been done in the past, but also pay cash for these dump trucks, where in the past they may have been leased. So the number is large, there's no question about that. But again, the Capital Planning Committee had certainly had more projects and requests out there for funding than the $1.5 million worth. These are the ones that they felt were critical to be addressed sooner rather than later based on the ability to pay.
And again, at town meeting on Article 9, I will go through each one similar. There are, I believe, 18, and I'll call out all 18, I'll read them out, and if someone wants to debate them, they can put a hold on it.
Sure.
And we can debate that one and just circle back, or just, pass the other ones and just work with what's left on that.
Sure.
It just seems to make sense to move what you can, and then, what needs to be debated, we can debate.
Yeah, with that amount of money, I'm sure there'll be some questions, no question about it, and as there should be. And, but most of them, I think, are pretty self-explanatory and not out of the unusual.
And that was 4-1 by the Board of Selectmen approval, and a Finance Committee approval of 3-1. And that takes us to Article number 10, which is the equipment purchase and project funding. How's this one different from Article 9?
These are smaller projects, smaller pieces of equipment, things of that nature that really aren't capital in nature. So they have been historically placed in a separate article to be addressed. Typically, they're not much more than $10,000, if at all. There is one that was added by the Finance Committee, or transferred, I guess you could say, from by the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen, the $25,000 for Kingston's portion of the Plymouth grant writer. Beyond that, there are four small items to deal with some smaller issues. So fire department replacing cabinets and countertops at one of the fire stations. We're looking at trying to automate some of the payroll systems that we have in town now, that right now is done primarily by hand and keyed by hand. And is there some automated software that we could purchase that would be more time, take less time to do, I guess, put it that way, and just free up some time for people to do some other things. So we're looking at that. We're also looking at repairing the highway department doors. Need to be replaced. It's the large doors that the vehicles go in and out of have rotted at the bottom, and they're requesting the Seaport Economic Council Resiliency Municipal contribution, $5,000. It's something that's been done in the past as well. So just smaller numbers, smaller projects.
Okay. And that was all favorable through the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee.
Mm-hmm.
Taking us to Article number 11, that's to eliminate future years' compensation and health insurance benefits for elected officials. What's the town trying to do with this?
So what the town is trying to do with this at this point is, at some point in the past, say a few years ago, board and commission members excuse me, were eligible to collect or be part of the health insurance plan for the town, as long as they paid whatever percentage employees paid. 4 or 5 years ago, the board proposed and the voters approved stopping that benefit for elected board and commission members, and grandfathering the individuals who were on that health insurance at that particular time. The Board of Selectmen at this point are looking to eliminate the expense of having the grandfathered elected officials on the town health insurance. So they're proposing an article to basically eliminate anybody who isn't who was grandfathered from a board or commission. They have to come off of the town health insurance by July 1st, 2022. So it's going to give them a year to locate alternative health insurance and switch off of the town health insurance.
So they will be covered regardless of how this vote goes for the
They'll be
next
covered for
fiscal
the next fiscal year. The Board of Selectmen wanted to allow time for individuals who may be impacted by this to find alternative coverage and have some time to be able to do that. So, so the proposal is to at least vote on it this year, and then it'll become effective in a year.
And is there, in summary, I see that affects about 14 people, and it's about a cost per person, about $9,000 from the town?
Yes.
And that was Board of Selectmen favorable 4-1, Finance Committee 4-0, which takes us to the next one, which is the elected officials' compensation, which you can see I start off with that $100.
You're a lucky man.
Yeah, you know, I don't even know when I went into the account, if you might have not even sent it to me.
All this much fun, you still get paid.
And that's, you know, that's what it's been for my 2 years. And it's pretty consistent numbers as last year, so what's going on there?
So this is the funding for the elected officials, the stipends that the different boards and commission members receive, as well as the three elected officials, the town clerk, the tax collector, and the treasurer. The treasurer and collector are both proposed to, all three positions, collector, treasurer, and clerk, excuse me, proposed to get a 2.5% cost of living raise from their earnings in 2021.
Okay. And that, just backing up to 11, is
Sure.
11, Article 11, are they taking away the funding to, like, the Board of Selectmen and the Moderator? Is that to eliminate
It is.
the $100? I'd have to say goodbye to that.
It could be,
Okay.
yes.
And that would be for for all the listed boards, that the numbers you have here in Article 12? from
Yes.
Moderator to the sewer commissioner, all the way down?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and that wouldn't be effective this year, that'd be in 2022?
Two. Yep, July 1st, 22.
Okay. And that was, returning to Article 12, that was favorable by the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the long one that I have the hardest time understanding is Article 13,
Yeah.
wage and personnel. So I'm going to just let you run with that for the next 20 minutes.
Yeah, I'll try. So Kingston's got a little bit of a unique situation in that the non-union employees fall under the Wage and Personnel Committee for identifying and determining pay ranges, recommending any type of wage adjustments in the upcoming fiscal year. And what occurred primarily because of the COVID situation in fiscal '21, the Wage and Personnel Committee worked with the Wage and Personnel employees and had those employees defer any type of compensation adjustment for fiscal '21. And agreed with those employees that they would provide the same wage adjustments as they provided the Kingston Employee Union during fiscal '22. So what happened, to make a long story short, I guess, is the Kingston Employee Union, along with the police and fire unions, agreed to a 2% cost of living and step raises for the positions. And so the Wage and Personnel Committee agreed to the same thing with the Wage and Personnel employees, or are proposing that. They presented their recommendations to the Board of Selectmen, and also had a conversation with the Finance Committee. The reams and reams of paper that you have in this summary is the actual wage and personnel policy that addresses all the changes and identifies all the wage schedules, whether it be hourly employees or salaried employees, and what those wage ranges will be, the steps and things of that nature, and identifies the positions that are in this, or part of this that fall under the Wage and Personnel Committee. So basically and we'll be seeing this with the union contracts as well, there's a 2% cost of living retroactive payment for fiscal '21, and that's being funded out of free cash. And then fiscal '22 for the Patrolmen's Union, the Kingston Employee Union, and the Wage and Personnel employees, they're proposing a step raise and a cost of living raise for fiscal '22. And Article 13 is what is funding the wage and personnel wage adjustments for fiscal '21 and '22.
Ballpark, and not to a specific number, how many employees of the town does this affect?
I would venture to guess 30 or 40.
And that was approved by the Board of Selectmen, and the Wage and Personnel approved it, but the Finance Committee has a split decision, 2-2 on this.
They did. The Finance Committee felt as though the compensation plan that was being followed when I made the recommendation, when the Wage and Personnel made this recommendation, that study recommended just step raises with no cost of living raise. Wage and Personnel, and I don't want to speak for them, I'm sure they'll speak much more adequately than I will at town meeting about this, but they felt as though they had made an agreement with the Wage and Personnel staff members to provide the same adjustment for wages in fiscal '22 as the Kingston Employee Union members were receiving, and that's why they proposed a step and a cost of living. The Finance Committee felt as though the cost of living was something they at least two of them couldn't support. So the vote to approve the recommendation of the Wage and Personnel Committee failed 2-2.
Okay. And the next three Articles 14, 15, and 16 are all union contracts. The first one being the police, and that was, town meeting approves the contract, right?
Yeah, so basically the town meeting, the town will bring forward a tentatively agreed upon contract, and the town provides estimated costs, a summary of what the changes were, those types of things. Town meeting votes on the cost associated with accepting this contract. That's what we're bringing the contract forward this year for. This will be fiscal '21, '22, and '23.
So if the
I'm
town,
sorry, fiscal 20, 21, and 22, I apologize. So the town, if the town approves this, they're approving funding for fiscal 20 and 21, and then fiscal 22, the costs associated with those 22, with that 22 budget would be included in the operating budget for fiscal 22.
and if it's not approved, you go back to the
Go
drawing
back to the
table?
drawing board. Yep.
And is there a cost to renegotiating union contracts?
There is. I mean, our labor contract with our labor council, there is a cost associated with anything more than collective bargaining. At this point, we've done that. If there was a simple fix to be able to negotiate, there may not be much of a cost. In this particular case where it's been a year and a half, give or take, before coming to terms, I think at least, I would believe all three of the union contracts that'll be discussed tonight, we would incur costs of going to mediation and fact-finding.
Okay. And this, the police one, Article 14, that was approved by both the Board and Selectmen, 5-0 and 4-0. And then the Article 15 is the town employee labor union contract.
Yeah, so people who are familiar with Kingston, it's KTEU, Kingston Town Employee Labor Union. And there's two segments of that union. There's the Streets, Trees, and Parks group, which is Article 16. Article 15 is more of the clerical staff in the town offices and clerical staff members in some of the different departments outside of the town offices. Very similar to what we just talked about with the police. The negotiations and the terms are consistent across the board. There were some, minor modifications to some of the more union-specific terms of the police agreement, just like there was with KTEU. But basically, they're looking at a 2% cost of living in fiscal '21, and then a cost of living and a step raise if they're eligible for one in fiscal '22.
What do you mean by if they're eligible?
So there are a certain number of steps in each position is eligible to receive a raise for. If they would get to their top step, they wouldn't get the wage adjustment. KTU is 3.75. What they would get is 2%.
Okay. And Article 15 was supported by the Board of Selectmen 5-0 and the Finance Committee 5-0, and that takes us to the next one, which was Article 16, which I think that's the clerical union one. I think we had
I apologize, my bad.
So 15 was the labor union.
15 was the labor union.
Same thing, just
Exact same explanation. I
16
apologize.
is the clerical union.
Yep.
And that was favorable by the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee, which, let's talk tennis.
Love to.
I didn't bring my racket, but
Either.
there's an Article 17 is a fund for reconstruction of the tennis courts at Silver Lake Regional High School. What can you tell us about that?
Sure. So the administration from Silver Lake made a presentation to the board indicating that there are some significant improvements that need to be made from a maintenance point of view at the tennis courts at the Silver Lake Regional High School. Each community is responsible for paying their percentage of the overall repairs. For these tennis courts, the amount that's been assigned to Kingston based on percentage of student population is $194,480. These funds would make some necessary improvements to the tennis court facility over at the high school. The Board of Selectmen didn't support it, 0-5, Finance Committee and Capital Planning Committee both supported it. But again, one of the things that will have to happen is that 2 of the 3 communities will have to approve this for these funds to be allocated to Silver Lake for these purposes. At this point, we have not heard back from the 2 other communities, but assume we will before the 22nd town meeting here in Kingston to determine whether or not this article needs to be brought forward for consideration or not. If the other 2 communities have already voted it down, it may just mean that we just pass over the article, because even if it did pass, the funds wouldn't be provided to Silver Lake.
Okay, and why doesn't, why wouldn't this just go in their budget? They're $11 million. Is that a maintenance issue?
I think it's frankly, it's something outside of, what their normal operating budget would call for. A little bit later on, we're gonna talk about a stabilization fund for Silver Lake, and those types of things are tools for the Silver Lake School Board to properly plan and fund for some of the capital needs they're gonna have as the physical plant gets older at the school. And this is part of those funding requests that I anticipate coming forward in the future. The district has been able to fund a lot of their capital needs in the past by budget savings that they are allowed to retain and reallocate. Some of the costs are becoming more expensive, obviously, as the property gets older, and I think that they're going to be challenged, and the school committee members indicated that when they presented to the Board of Selectmen, that they're going to be challenged a bit to meet the needs, the capital needs of the district, and address those in a timely manner with the surplus, the previous year surplus budgets that they have available to fund those on their own.
But if the other two communities approve it, then we're going to pay for it anyways, correct?
That's right.
And that was Board of Selectmen, no approval, Finance Committee, no approval, and Capital Planning was 4-1.
Take a break?
Yeah. Turning to Article 18, Transfer to Employment Liability Reserve Fund. What is this?
So this is an appropriation to fund the vacation buyouts of some of the longer-term employees that when they leave employment, we owe them for whatever vacation time has been accrued. There's an appropriation made every year in this warrant article to properly fund that potential liability at $100,000 a year. So we've got about $9,800 left in there. We're asking for $90,000 this year to get us back up close to the $100,000, and we'll use that money as people retire to pay them for any accrued vacation time.
And that's favorable by the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee, 5-0 and 4-0, which brings us to Article 19, which is transfer to other post-employment health insurance liability funds. So this is not pension, but something.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's you know, post-employment benefits, whether it be health insurance that we offer our retirees, things of that nature. There's a liability out there that we're slowly poking away at. This $100,000 that's requested every year gets us closer to properly funding that potential liability. So it's an article that's been on the books now for a few years, and we're consistently trying to put some funds away to get us in a better financial situation overall.
Okay. And that was favorable by the Board of Selectmen, 4-0, and the Finance Committee, 4-0. Article 20 is transfer to the stabilization fund, which is essentially free cash going into a savings account?
Yeah, so free cash is, I guess, more of a liquid account, where the stabilization fund is more of a long-term emergency fund that we try to set aside money every year on that allows us just to strengthen and increase the amount of money that's set aside in a more of a long-term emergency fund that if there was ever a need, we'd have you know, a significant amount of money in there to help with whatever that crisis was. At this point, we're at $2.8 million. It's a housekeeping item. Every year we try to add to that. 2022 is no different.
Okay. And that was favorable by the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee, 5-0 and 4-0 respectively. Article 21 is the Sampson Fund appropriations, and that is that's money that's used from the trust for educational programs and other programs through the town. It's a little bit more money this year, but the majority of the funds weren't used last year.
Right.
Because we didn't do the night out, we didn't have the parade, we
Right.
didn't have the luminaries, so this is just money that's available in the fund. If it's not used, because the parades don't go, it goes
Right back to the fund.
right back to the fund.
Right.
And that was recommended by the Board of Selectmen 5-0, and not recommended by the...
At this point, the Finance Committee has recommended that
Oh, they
they
have.
reconsidered it, and I apologize, you probably have another copy. Finance Committee reconsidered and is supporting this. There were some concerns initially. There was a $10,000 request for September 11th, where it's going to be the 20th year anniversary of what would occurred. And there had not been any specific plans made, so members of the Finance Committee were a little hesitant to approve that expenditure without having some details. Since that time, some of the details have been identified and presented, and the Finance Committee reconsidered their vote and are now in support.
Okay. And if it doesn't go forward, then the money just gets returned, so
That's right.
it's
Yep.
Article 22 is the Community Preservation Committee Administration Budget. And this is, projects throughout the town, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are 4 projects this year that submitted applications to community preservation. All of them are recreation-related, which are allowable within that fund's purpose. There's a sand volleyball beach court that would be constructed at Grays Beach. Opachesky's athletic complex, engineering services for accessible walkways. The Reed Community Tennis Court, partial fence replacement, which is something that needs to occur, and the Opachinski field restoration, that was not supported by either the Board of Selectmen or the Finance Committee, primarily because they were looking to use some specific type of fertilizer on the fields that ultimately would increase the operating costs that would be transferred over to the town's operating budget in the future. So those, again, are funds that are collected from property taxes and recommended by a committee and ultimately then presented to the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee for their consideration. They've voted on each one of those articles, and now it's up to the voters to determine whether or not they support those proposed projects.
Okay, and again, at town meeting, I'll probably take one project at a time, and we can hold it, debate it, and if the other ones go, then we can vote those and circle back. So the Article 23 is Chapter 90 funds, and this is just money for infrastructure for
Yeah.
the state, right?
The state provides funds every year to every community based on the number of road miles in town and versus the amount of money they have available to fund these. It's a housekeeping item that allows Kingston to expend Chapter 90 funds, which are specifically for the maintenance of town-accepted roads.
And that was approved by the Board of Selectmen along with the Finance Committee. 5-0 and 4-0. And Article 24 is the Exit 10 design. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So the design for the project, it's a joint project with Duxbury and Kingston. What the funding being requested is for half of the cost of the engineering services that will be needed to design and construct signalized intersections off of the off-ramps and on-ramps in that general area. I think if anybody has traveled those areas in town over the last few years, they've noticed more and more accidents, which are concerning, certainly for people who travel that way. That roadway, we've been able to apply, and I say we, really, it's been the town of Duxbury's done the lion's share of the work. They've applied for state funding to get the lion's share of the work paid for by the state. The town, as I mentioned, will fund half of the cost of the engineering. We anticipate that the cost of the project will be well over $2 million, all funded by the Commonwealth from one program or another. You wouldn't see the improvements made until sometime around 2026. However, the state and the way they operate, they need their funding available for the engineering work, which is the local responsibility. And then once that's done, they continue the planning of that project and the funding allocation for that project, which at this point is in 2026. There was a question raised at one point during the discussion, what if in 2021 the towns of Duxbury and Kingston raise the money and the state doesn't do the work? The state will be compelled to do the work at some point, as I mentioned, it's expected in 2026 right now, to see a full signalized intersection in that area to try to address the accidents that have been accumulating up there.
And that was favorable by the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee, 5-0 and 4-0. Article 25 was modification of oversight authority of the health agent and assessor and the assistant assessor. What's the town trying to accomplish here?
So what we're trying to do is, right now, the assistant assessor reports directly to the Board of Assessors. The health agent reports directly to the Board of Health. What this article is intended to do is have the day-to-day oversight of the health officer and the assistant assessor fall underneath the town administrator rather than the two different boards, really to provide the support and assistance and oversight that those positions, warrant and deserve. There's some concern, I think, that's been raised by certainly the Board of Health and I think to some degree by the Board of Assessors that they're losing some of their authority, and I really don't think that's the case. It's really to try to streamline, as much as you can streamline government, try to streamline government. A lot of the different boards and commissions now have a staff liaison rather than an employee who works directly for them. This would be very similar to that. The Board of Health would still dictate whatever the health rules are in town. The Board of Assessors would still oversee the assessment records in town. But, this is a way to try to modernize government a bit, allow for the employee and the employer to work a little closer together, rather than having another level of government between the oversight of those employees and the employee themselves. So I know you're going to hear, like you've heard in the past, it's, oh, this is terrible, it's worked well, why are we changing? In my mind, most communities have already made this change, and this is really to help streamline, as I mentioned before, the process and the oversight of the employees. It's not going to take away from any of the Board of Commission responsibilities. It just allows us to properly manage the employee.
So in essence, they'd
They'd work for the town administrator.
Correct.
Yep, no question. And that's really all it is at this point is.
And that was favorable by the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee. 5-0, 4-0, if I didn't say that. Article 26 is a stabilization fund. You touched on this a minute ago for the Silver Lake Regional School District. Just want to backtrack and tell us again about that.
Sure. So the Silver Lake is looking to establish a stabilization fund that would allow them to, plan for and have funding available to address some of the larger capital projects that their available funding just isn't able to provide funding for. It's another tool in their toolbox, so to speak. So when they are looking to make roof repairs, things of that nature, more expensive repairs with an older infrastructure, they have funding available to do that. Again, it would allow the school board, overall Silver Lake School Board, to vote the use of those funds in that stabilization fund themselves without having to go back to a town meeting in any one of the three towns to expend that stabilization fund. So that's a bit of a difference between the town stabilization fund and Silver Lakes. But I think what the school committee is looking to try to do is again, try to properly plan for their capital expenses, their larger capital expenses, so they have the funds available when it's needed.
So and they'd be taking a small portion of their budget each year and just kind of banking it?
No, I think what they would do is they would ask for a certain amount of money that would be consistent with their capital improvement plan over and above their operating budget. You know, I think it would be similar to what they're asking for tennis courts, if they had that stabilization fund. You know, and they had the funds available and allotted for the tennis courts. You may not see that warrant article on a town warrant in the future, because they'd have the authority and the funding available to designate whatever funds were necessary for that particular repair.
And that would be voted on by the school committee, correct?
School committee, yep.
And is this similar to the other ones, that if Halifax and Plimpton approve it, then we're part of it?
Yeah, again, it's going to have 2/3 of the 3 towns. My understanding, and I haven't confirmed this, but my understanding as of earlier today, Halifax and Plimpton did not support this. So if this is confirmed, if that is confirmed before town meeting, and I'm sure it will be one way or another, this article may not need to be heard at the town meeting.
And that was not favorable by the Board of Selectmen. It was 0-4, and Finance Committee was 3-1. Turning to Article 27, which is the 25-mile-per-hour speed limit.
So there's obviously parts of town that people are concerned about the speeds of the vehicles that are traveling some of our roadways. What this article would allow for is for the town to reduce the speed limits to 25 miles an hour in what they are calling thickly settled business districts. So I think it's important for people to realize that if this were to pass, I would argue that, or suggest that at least 90% of the roads in town would not be part of a thickly settled business district, and could not, and this portion of the Mass General Law would not apply to a neighborhood street, for example. It's made to try to reduce speeds in the downtown area where, you know, there's a lot of traffic. There's also a lot of pedestrian activity to make the roads that would fall into this category safer for everybody who's using them, and reduce the speeds to try to do that.
And is this done by the police, the fire, or the Board of Selectmen? Do you know who's gonna decide this?
So ultimately, you know, I think it would be a combination of the police department and the Board of Selectmen. There is a safety committee in town. They've been talking now for a while, off and on, and I think they would also probably have a suggestion on roads that they feel as though are able to be, that 25-mile-an-hour speed limit is able to be applied to, and make recommendations to the board and the police department.
And that was favorable by the Board of Selectmen, 5-0. Moving on to 28 is an amendment in regards to General Laws, Chapter 6, Article 1, Payment Agreements for Overdue Taxes.
So this article would provide the town treasurer some flexibility in trying to negotiate a payment plan with property owners who owe past due taxes. And what this would allow for is the treasurer to waive up to 50% of the interest on a past due property tax, a property that owes property taxes, if they met certain criteria and kept up with a payment plan. The idea is to assist those who may need assistance with paying off old outstanding taxes, improve our cash flow, and try to get everybody as current as we can on their property taxes.
Is there a number of properties that are behind in the town, if you're aware of?
There are some. I mean, certainly the percentage is not high at all, but we do have individuals who are interested in trying to do something, but they just aren't able to pay the amounts that we do plus interest, and try to maintain a more current balance with their property taxes. This would allow our treasurer to try to work with those property owners to have them start making payments and getting themselves back.
And are you aware if other communities have adopted similar?
Yeah, there's a lot of, this is, enabling legislation the state has provided for towns to adopt if they want to. There's been some talk here a little bit about it. I know the treasurer has had some conversations about it internally, and then ultimately, it's been brought forward this spring, and again, it's just another tool to try to help the citizens in the community who need it.
Awesome. And that was approved by the Board of Selectmen 5-0, and the Finance Committee 3-1.
Mm-hmm.
Now, 29 is the amendment of the bylaws, that the town amend the Town of Kingston bylaws to amend Article 4, Chapter 4 of its general bylaws by adding a new section 4 through 6 as printed in the warrant.
And this just allows the town clerk to reassign bylaw numbers, so frankly, the bylaws, as they're adopted and amended, still make sense and are sequential.
And that was favorable from the Board of Selectmen, 5-0. Article 30 is amendment to general bylaws, Chapter 10, Article 5, animal control.
So this article is proposing to change the date of the annual kennel license renewals so it coincides with the date that the town clerk starts issuing late fees. So right now, kennel licenses must be renewed by April 1st. The clerk starts issuing late fees on March 15th. So what we're asking is the kennel fees be paid to the town by March 15th rather than April 1st. So 16-day difference to allow for some consistency on when the fines are issued.
And then the article, it was favorable by the Board of Selectmen. Moving on to 31, which is an amendment to general bylaws, Chapter 30, Article 1, the sewer bylaw.
So this will, and again, I don't have a tremendous amount of working knowledge of some of the wastewater articles, but it's a bylaw change that would add to the sewer rules and regulations with regards to connecting buildings on town sewer systems.
Meaning when the sewer's put in, how long the building would have to connect to the.
That's my understanding.
Correct. And that was favorable by the Board of Selectmen, 5-0.
Yep, so you'd have to connect within 6 months of the wastewater going in front of your property.
And do you know if there's a number of projects?
I don't know specifically
Is this more in the business
what that may
area?
impact, but I will say that I think that the planning board and the sewer commissioners have worked with those developers to make sure they know this is coming, so that there's, at least they're aware that there may be those impacts to them in their development.
Okay. 32 is amendment of the zoning, Article 31 was favorable, 5-0, article by the Board of Selectmen. Article 32 is amendment of the zoning bylaws, floodplain overlay district.
So the FEMA flood maps have been revised. This is a housekeeping article, so to speak, to amend the zoning bylaws to comply with the FEMA floodplain maps.
And that's favorable by the Board of Selectmen, 5-0. And that takes us to my favorite article.
That's right.
It's, I actually have 4 roosters that are up at 5:30 every day, and there's no controlling them in the form of my children. So this is a rooster ordinance, and it's, what can you tell us about that?
So this is a petitioned article that was submitted by the appropriate number of voters in town that would like to amend the general bylaw, that roosters shall be kept between the hours of 7 PM and 7 AM within a fully enclosed structure, designed to minimize some of the noise. Obviously, some people aren't as excited about having farm animals in their neighborhood as others. So what they're asking in this article is to try to reduce and/or eliminate some of the noise from the roosters during the evening hours.
And I actually Googled this, putting them in a closed container quiets them down.
I guess.
Really fascinated by this one. None of my neighbors have roosters, but I can imagine it must get loud.
Yeah, I can imagine. I don't have anybody with roosters that live by me either, and as nice as they are to walk by, I'm not sure I want to have one waking me up at 5 in the morning every day.
Future gift to the town administrator, buy him a rooster.
Best.
This was favorable by the Board of Selectmen, 5-0. That's all of the articles. I want to thank you for being here with me. I've asked a lot of questions about the articles. If you think I've formed an opinion one way or the other, I'm just trying to make some conversation. I have opinions, but I'm just trying to make conversations here. I don't vote at town meetings, so this is just informative by myself. I would encourage all the residents to attend town meeting on May 22nd, 9 a.m. Hopefully start right at 9. We need at least 100 people there to start, and hopefully we can get through this, have some lively debate, and see where it takes us. If you have any questions, one thing I've learned from my time here as the moderator over the last 2 years is the Board of Selectmen, they work tirelessly, and they're available. So if you don't feel comfortable talking or raising a concern at town meeting, feel free to reach out to the Board of Selectmen or the town administrator, and I'm sure they'll respond to any questions or concerns you have about the articles. So, Keith, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.